The note he found in the barn changed everything. Evening falls over the rolling hills of Whispering Creek, Texas. The sky painted in hues of amber and purple. A weathered cowboy sits on his wooden porch, rocking gently in his chair. His eyes gaze out at the horizon as he begins to speak. You know, some folks say life's all about the big moments. Weddings, births, all that fancy stuff folks put in photo albums. But I learned a long time ago that life has a funny way of changing course when you least expect it. Sometimes, it's the smallest things that end up shaping who we become. It was the summer of '85. I was just 27 then, full of vinegar and not nearly as wise as I thought I was. My daddy had passed the previous winter, leaving me the family ranch, 500 acres of stubborn Texas soil that had been in our family since my great-granddaddy's time. Times were tough back then. The drought that year was meaner than a rattlesnake with a toothache. Cattle prices had dropped lower than a prairie dog hole, and the bank was breathing down my neck about the mortgage. I reckon I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders, too proud to ask for help and too stubborn to admit I was in over my head. Sarah, my wife of 3 years, was pregnant with our first child. Sweet woman she was, still is, mind you, never complaining even though I know she worried herself sick at night. She'd grown up in town, daughter of the local doctor, and ranch life wasn't exactly what she'd pictured for herself. But she loved me something fierce, and that was enough to make her stay. I remember that day like it was yesterday, July 15th, the kind of Texas heat that makes you feel like you're standing in the devil's kitchen. I'd been up since before dawn, mending fences on the north pasture, my shirt soaked through by 10 in the morning. My old border collie, Blue, had been trailing behind me all morning, but suddenly he darted off toward the old barn, the one my granddaddy built with his own 2 hands back in '32. Blue, I hollered after him, but that dog had a mind of his own when he got the scent of something. With a sigh, I gathered my tools and followed him. Now, that old barn hadn't been used much since Daddy got sick. It was full of rusted equipment, moldy hay, and Lord knows what else. Blue was scratching at something in the corner, kicking up dust that danced in the streams of sunlight poking through the worn wooden slats. "What you got there, boy?" I asked, making my way over. He'd found a weathered leather satchel, tucked away behind some old feed sacks. Curious, I picked it up, brushing off years of dust and cobwebs. The leather was cracked with age, but the brass buckle still shone when I wiped it clean. Inside was a collection of letters, yellowed with time, and a small leather-bound journal. My daddy's name was inscribed on the inside cover in handwritten that I didn't recognize. Beneath it, in small, careful letters, "May these words find you when you need them most." I sat down right there on a hay bale, Blue resting his head on my knee, as I opened to the first page. "Dear Thomas," it began, "if you're reading this, I've been gone a while now." It was my granddaddy's handwritten. The journal was dated 1945, just after he'd returned from the war in Europe. Page after page of wisdom, stories, and secrets he'd never shared with anyone, not even my daddy, apparently. Stories about the ranch during the Great Depression, about me to my grandmother at a town dance, about the night my daddy was born during the worst blizzard in county history. But it wasn't just stories. There were detailed maps of the property, marking places I'd never explored. Notes about soil conditions, about which pastures were best for what seasons. And most interesting of all, detailed instructions about a series of underground springs my granddaddy had discovered but never told a soul about. "The land will provide," he'd written, "if you know where to look and have the patience to listen." I lost track of time in that dusty old barn. The afternoon sun was beginning to wane when Sarah's voice called out to me. She found me surrounded by papers, tears streaming down my face like a greenhorn at his first rodeo. "Jack," she said, her voice soft with worry. "What is it? What's wrong?" I looked up at her, standing there in her simple cotton dress, her hand resting on her swollen belly, and I felt something shift inside me. A burden lifted, maybe, or perhaps it was just the realization that I wasn't alone in this struggle. "It's my granddaddy," I said, holding up the journal. "He left us a way out." The next morning, I saddled up my horse before dawn and followed the map to the location my granddaddy had marked with a simple X. It was in the far eastern corner of the property, a rocky outcrop that I'd always avoided because the soil was too poor for grazing. After about an hour of sear chin, I found what he described, a narrow crevice between two boulders hidden by overgrown mesquite. I had to dismount and lead my horse through on foot, the path barely wide enough for us to squeeze through. And then, like a scene from one of them fancy movies, the narrow path opened up into a hidden valley. Not large, maybe 20 acres in all, but lush and green despite the drought that had turned the rest of the county brown. In the center was a crystal-clear spring, bubbling up from the ground, and for men a small stream that disappeared into the rocks on the far side. Surrounding it was the richest soil I'd ever seen, black as coffee grounds and just begging to be planted. My granddaddy had discovered an oasis hidden away on land that had been in our family for generations, and he kept it secret, saving this gift for when it would be needed most. I sat down by that spring and read more of his journal. He wrote about how he'd found the valley during the Dust Bowl years, when everything was dying and families all around were losing their farms. He'd used the water from the spring sparingly, carrying it back to the main farm in buckets after dark, just enough to keep the crops alive without raising suspicion from neighbors who might have tried to claim it for themselves. Land's got secrets, he wrote, just like people do. Sometimes keeping a secret ain't about deception. It's about preservation. That hidden valley changed everything for us. Within a month, I'd rigged up an irrigation system that brought water to our main fields without draining the spring dry. By year's end, our crops were the only ones in the county that hadn't withered and died. The bank manager himself came out to see what miracle we'd pulled off. But it wasn't just the water that saved us. It was the wisdom in those pages, decades of knowledge about the land, about ranching, about life itself. My granddaddy had lived through 2 world wars and the Great Depression. He'd weathered droughts and floods and everything in between. And through it all, he'd been watching, learning, and documented all for the day when his grandson might need a helping hand. There was one particular passage that stuck with me. A man's got 2 hands, he wrote, one to help himself and one to help others. If you're only using one, you're only living half a life. That philosophy changed my approach to everything. When our fortunes turned around, I didn't just focus on building up our own ranch. I reached out to neighbors who were struggling, share water during the worst of the drought, offer and work to those who'd lost their own land, even buying up adjacent properties at fair prices when families decided to move on, rather than letting them fall into the hands of the big corporate outfits that were starting to gobble up family farms. Sarah gave birth to our son that December. We named him Thomas after my daddy and granddaddy both. The first of 4 children who would grow up knowing the value of hard work, the importance of community, and the power of knowing your own history. That spring became our family's special place. On hot summer evenings, we'd ride out there as a family, have picnics by the water, tell stories under the stars. It was there that I taught each of my children to fish, to ride, to identify the constellations overhead. And it was there, 30 years later, that I took each of them, one by one, to share my granddaddy's journal and the lessons it contained. Life on a ranch ain't easy. Never has been, never will be. We had our share of hard times, even after finned in that journal. Harsh winters, cattle disease, machinery breaking down at the worst possible moments. But we had something that carried us through. Knowledge passed down, wisdom earned through generations of trial and error, and a deep connection to the land beneath our boots. You know, it's funny how life works sometimes. That old barn could have been torn down a dozen times over the years. That satchel could have rotted away, or been carried off by critters, or just plain forgotten in the corner. Blue could have chased after a rabbit that day, instead of leading me to that dusty corner. One small discovery, one forgotten journal, one hidden spring. They don't sound like much in the telling, but they changed the course of not just my life, but the lives of my children, and now my grandchildren too. Our youngest grandson, little Joey, he's about 9 now, loves hearing this story. Last time he visited, he looked up at me with those big brown eyes, his grandmother's eyes, and asked, "Grandpa, do you think there are other secrets on the ranch we haven't found yet?" I tousled his hair and smiled. "I reckon there are, son. This land's been here a lot longer than any of us. It's got stories and secrets we can't even imagine. The truth is, I've added my own sections to that journal over the years. Lessons I've learned, mistakes I've made, successes I've celebrated. I mark my own spots on that map. Not just physical places, but moments in time, decisions that shaped who I am and what this ranch has become. One day, when the time is right, one of my grandkids will find themselves fast in their own struggles. Maybe it'll be Joey, maybe one of the others. And somehow, some way, that journal will find its way into their hands, just like it found its way into mine. That's how legacy works, I suppose. Not just in the things we build, or the money we save, or the land we pass down, but in the wisdom we share, the stories we tell, and the love that flows through generations like water from a hidden spring. The old cowboy pauses, taking a sip for his weathered mug. The sunset has given way to twilight, and the first stars are appearing in the Texas sky. You know what my granddaddy wrote on the very last page of his journal? Just 7 simple words. The land knows. The land remembers. The land provides. Took me most of my life to truly understand what he meant by that. We think we own the land, but really, we're just temporary caretakers. We belong to it as much as it belongs to us. Everything we are, everything we have, comes from this soil. That note I found in the barn didn't just save our ranch. It saved me from becoming the kind of man who tries to fight his battles alone. It taught me that strength isn't about refusing help. It's about knowing how to accept the wisdom of those who came before you, and how to pass that wisdom along to those who'll come after. Life's full of unexpected turns. Sometimes you think you're at the end of your rope, only to discover that someone tied a knot in it for you long ago, knowing someday you'd need something to hold on to. That old leather satchel sits on my desk now. The journal inside has grown thicker over the decades, with pages added by my hand. Sometimes on quiet evenings like this, I'll take it out and read through it again. My granddaddy's words, my daddy's occasional notes in the margins, and my own contributions. 3 generations of Barrett men talking to each other across time. I've asked Sarah to make sure I'm buried with a copy of it when my time comes. The original, though, that'll stay with the land, waiting for the next person who needs its guidance. He chuckles softly, running a weathered hand over his silver beard. You know what's funny? Sometimes I wonder if my granddaddy planned it all along. If he knew exactly when and how that journal will be found. He was clever that way, always thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Maybe he knew exactly what he was doing, placing that satchel where it would wait patiently until the moment it was needed most. Or maybe it was just luck, divine intervention, the hand of fate. I don't rightly know, and I suppose it doesn't much matter. What matters is that it happened, and that it changed everything. The lesson I took from it all: pay attention to the small things, the easy-to-miss things. A dog chasing a scent, a forgotten satchel in a dusty corner, a journal full of memories. Sometimes the biggest blessings come in the smallest packages. And never underestimate the power of leaving something behind. Not just property or money or possessions, but wisdom, experience, love, the kind of inheritance that can't be taxed or divided or spent away. When I was a young man, I thought success meant making my own way, proving I didn't need nobody's help. Now I know better. Success isn't what you accomplish on your own. It's what you help others accomplish after you're gone. That's the real legacy. Not the cattle or the crops or even this land, as much as I love it, but the ripples we send out into the future, the lives we touch, the knowledge we pass on, the love we leave behind. The cowboy falls silent for a moment, watching as the first fireflies of the evening begin to dance above the tall grass. When he speaks again, his voice is softer, more reflective. You know, I go back to that hidden valley every year on July 15th. The anniversary of the day, blue led me to that satchel. I sit by that spring with my granddaddy's journal in my lap, and I write down my thoughts for the year. Lessons learned, mistakes made, blessings counted. Last year, I took my oldest grandson, Matthew, with me for the first time. He's 17 now, already got his heart set on Taquine over the ranch someday. Smart kid, hardworking. Reminds me of myself at that age, though hopefully a bit wiser. We sat there together by that spring, and I told him the whole story, start to finish. When I was done, he was quiet for a long time, just watching the water bubble up from the ground. Finally, he looked at me and said, "Grandpa, do you ever wonder what else is out there? What other secrets might be hidden on this land?" I smiled at him. "Every day, son. Every single day." Then I handed him the journal and told him it was his turn to add a page. At first, he protested, said he didn't have anything important enough to write. But I insisted. "Your story is just as important as mine or your great-great-granddaddy's," I told him. "The only difference is that yours is still being written." He thought for a long time before he put pen to paper. When he finished, he handed it back to me without a word. I read what he'd written, and I confess, my eyes weren't exactly dry when I finished. "The land knows," he'd written. "The land remembers. The land provides. And so do we. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say." That boy understood in an afternoon what had taken me decades to figure out. That's the thing about wisdom. It can take a lifetime to earn, but only a moment to share. And sometimes, the people we think we're teaching end up teaching us instead. The old cowboy leans back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the last light of day is fading. Life's a funny thing, full of twists and turns you never see coming. That day, when I woke up and headed out to mend fences, I had no idea my whole world was about to change. I was just a man doing his job, trying to hold onto a piece of land that seemed determined to slip through my fingers. But that's how it always happens, isn't it? The big moments don't announce themselves. They slip in quietly, disguised as ordinary days. It's only later, looking back, that you realize how important they were. That old barn's still standing, you know. It's been rebuilt and repaired over the years, but the bones of it are the same ones my granddaddy put there nearly a century ago. I go out there sometimes to the spot where Blue found that satchel, and I just stand there, talking it all in. It's just an old barn, just a dusty corner, just a leather satchel full of yellowed pages. But to me, it's sacred ground, the place where past and future met, where one generation reached out to another across decades of silence. They say a man's home is his castle. Well, that old barn is my cathedral, the place where I found not just a way to save our ranch, but a way to understand my place in the grand scheme of things. Not just a landowner, but a link in a chain stretching back generations and forward into a future I won't live to see. He reaches for his mug, takes another sip, and continues. "You know what's written on the inside cover of that journal now? Below my granddaddy's original inscription and my daddy's name? For simple words, for those who follow. Because that's what it's all about, isn't it? Blazing a trail for those who follow. Leaving signposts and shelter and sustenance for the journey ahead. Not just for our own bloodkin, but for anyone who might need what we have to offer. That's why I've opened up parts of the ranch for educational tours for local schools. Why I worked with the county to establish a small agricultural college on some of our land. Why I've taken on apprentices from families with no ranching background, teaching them the skills my granddaddy taught my daddy, who taught me. Knowledge kept hidden away serves no one. Like that spring bubbling up from the ground, water's meant to flow, to nourish, to sustain life beyond its source. My granddaddy understood that. That's why he left that journal, not just as a lifeline for his family, but as a testament to a way of life worth preserving. A reminder that we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, and that we have a responsibility to those who will come after. The stars are fully visible now, a spectacular canopy of light against the Texas night sky. The old cowboy points upward. My granddaddy taught my daddy to navigate by those stars. My daddy taught me. I taught my children, and they're teaching their children. Knowledge passing down, generation to generation, unchanging and reliable as the North Star itself. Some things change. The equipment we use, the crops we grow, the challenges we face. But the important things, the values, the connections, the responsibility to the land and to each other, those things remain constant, like bedrock beneath shifting soil. That's the real treasure my granddaddy left in that barn. Not just solutions to immediate problems, but a reminder of what endures when everything else falls away. I still remember every word of that first page. "Dear Thomas," it began. "If you're reading this, I've been gone a while now. But in another sense, I'm still right there with you, watching over your shoulder as you read these words. And he was right. He was there, in a way, just as he's here now, as I sit on this porch telling his story. Just as we'll both be there, years from now, when some future Barrett finds themselves in need of guidance. The old cowboy falls silent for a moment, lost in thought. When he speaks again, his voice carries the weight of hard-earned wisdom. You know, there's an old saying about how a society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they know they'll never sit. My granddaddy planted a whole forest for us. Not just that hidden valley, but a legacy of knowledge, of values, of connection to this land. I've tried to do the same, to plant seeds that will grow long after I'm gone, to leave behind not just a prosperous ranch, but a story worth telling, a path worth following. That's what that note in the barn taught me, more than anything else, that we're all just temporary caretakers of the land, of knowledge, of traditions worth preserving. Our job isn't to hold tight to these things, but to tend them carefully and pass them along better than we found them. So if there's a moral to this long-winded tale, I suppose it's this: pay attention to the small things, the easy-to-miss things. And when you find something of value, whether it's a hidden spring or a piece of wisdom or a moment of beauty, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Pass it on. Add your chapter to the story, and leave the book open for others to do the same. Because none of us makes it through this life alone. We need the help of those who came before us. And it's our duty to offer help to those who will come after. That old leather satchel in that dusty barn corner didn't just change my life. It showed me what life is for. The old cowboy smiles, his weathered face creasing with lines earned through decades of sun and wind and laughter and tears. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth leaving. As the night deepens around him, the old cowboy rocks gently in his chair, at peace with his place in the grand story of his family, his land, and the wisdom that flows like water from a hidden spring, nourishing generation after generation. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another tale from the porch. Your support means the world to this old cowboy, and I've got plenty more stories where this one came from. Drop a comment below if you've ever found something unexpected that changed your life. I'd love to hear your stories too. Until next time, friends, may your trails be clear and your water sweet.